As a child, she had to flee Nazi Germany. She then experienced anti-Semitism firsthand again in 1930 South Africa. She also witnessed apartheid.
Unfortunately, this was my experience from day one, so I knew what my attitude towards this country was.
Ruth Weiss became a journalist and an important voice in the fight for African independence. She interviewed Nelson Mandela, met Robert Mugabe, and was friends with writer Nadine Gordimer, who received the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1991. Ruth Weiss knew them all. She's a witness to a century of history. Shortly before her 100th birthday, we visited her in her new home in Denmark. As she leafs through her autobiography, which was published almost 30 years ago, the memories come flooding back. Beginning with her childhood in southern German Franconia, with her parents and older sister Margot.
As the only Jewish child in the village school, I had a wonderful time with many friends, mostly girlfriends.
This came to an abrupt end when the Nazis seized power in January 1933.
From one day to the next, I no longer existed for the teacher. He no longer called on me in class, and no one played with me during recess.
Ruth Weiss's family lived near Nuremberg, a Nazi stronghold. The Jewish population faced increased discrimination here earlier than elsewhere. Hitler chose Nuremberg as the city of the Reich Party rallies. The Nazis also ruled on the streets. Ruth's parents were aware of the danger. Her father lost his job and as a Jew couldn't find a new one. A letter from abroad unexpectedly provided a lifeline.
There were two families in South Africa, in Johannesburg, that we were related to. And one of these two families wrote to the head of my family that he had heard there was a problem with Jews in Germany, and he said they were looking for white people in South Africa. He said he would vouch for us. And so my father was able to emigrate in 1933.
The situation in Germany deteriorated rapidly. The Nuremberg race laws were proclaimed in 1935. In South Africa too, anti-Semitism was on the rise, and the extreme right was strong. Shortly before Jewish immigration was made almost impossible, Ruth Weiss and her family received the necessary papers. The ship they sailed on was one of the last to take Jews to South Africa. Ruth and her sister Margot soon realized, though, that they were not welcome in their new homeland.
I have to say that we went from one anti-Semitic country to another. I went to a very poor school in a poor district. I could feel that I wasn't accepted by my classmates, except for one. And that was the same reason as in Germany.
How did people in South Africa find out what was happening in Europe?
During the war, German Jews were much closer to the war, to what was happening. They wanted to know what was going on.
This is London calling.
The BBC and other broadcasters were sources of information about the war and the persecution of the Jews, but the world and Ruth Weiss and her family only found out the full extent of the horror after the war. 6 million murdered Jews, many relatives among them.
First sadness, but also anger and hate.
Her experience made it all the more difficult to accept the marginalization of people in South Africa. Apartheid was established by the state in 1948. It was the authoritarian, self-declared domination of the white population of European descent over all other groups.
We had the right skin color, even if we had the wrong religion. After the war, the poor whites had at least one black employee, despite their poverty. But they despised them. They considered them skepsels. They were creatures, not Mense, people. Unfortunately, I experienced that from day one, so I knew what my attitude to this country was.
Sodass ich wusste, wie meine Einstellung zu diesem Land ist.
For Ruth Weiss, apartheid was unacceptable. She started meeting up with like-minded people in a cultural association. Here she also met her husband Hans Weiss, a journalist. She travelled and wrote under his name, writing for European media about the increasingly brutal oppression of black people and their growing resistance. When her marriage broke down, Ruth Weiss's real career as a journalist began in the early 1960s. She met the young Nelson Mandela, then freedom fighter, later president. She interviewed him while he was in hiding. The apartheid regime reacted harshly. She was not allowed to return to South Africa from a trip abroad.
I was excluded from South Africa while I was in Germany. And I was only allowed to go back for one night to say goodbye to my parents when my son was 2.5 or 3 months old.
Turbulent years followed. She lived in London and southern Rhodesia, today's Zimbabwe, later getting expelled from this country too. But Africa never let her go, and her son Sasha was always with her.
It was easy for me to go to a village with a child and get interviews. If I hadn't had a child with me, it wouldn't have been so easy. But I had status. A woman without a child is nothing.
Status, eine Frau ohne Kind ist ein Nichts.
Between 1975 and 78, Ruth Weiss lived in Germany once again, working in the Africa department of Deutsche Welle in Cologne. As in Africa, she was often the only woman in the job. For example, in this German TV program from 1976.
Übereinstimmen, was zuletzt gesagt hat, dass die westliche Welt doch sehr große Schuld trägt an dem, was in Südafrika über die letzten 16 Jahren seit Sharpeville passiert ist.
Ruth Weiss was only able to return to South Africa again for the first time in the early 1990s, following the end of apartheid. In 1994, Nelson Mandela became South African president after the country's first free democratic election. In the decades that followed, she wrote non-fiction books, novels, and her memoirs. She often talks to school classes about her life. In 2005, Ruth Weiss was considered for the Nobel Peace Prize for her decades of commitment. She's also received Germany's Federal Cross of Merit. And then, finally, the country's most important award, the South African Order of the Companions of O.R. Tambo. To conclude our interview, we asked Ruth Weiss where she sees her home today.
I never really fully left Africa, but where is my home? Where people walk in step with me. People who aren't, how should I put it, just focused on their careers, but who also look out for other people. I'm glad I got to know so many people who took that seriously. That is my home.
Das ernst nahmen. Das ist meine Heimat.